And in baseball, the Baltimore Orioles tied a Major League record yesterday that they would just as soon forget. Milwaukee handed Baltimore its 13th straight loss, and that equals the worst start ever by a Major League team. Defensive ineptitude was the cause of yesterday's debacle. The winless Birds allowed 4 unearned runs on 4 errors and 2 passed balls in the 9-5 loss. And even Brewer fans booed their losing effort. But there's still at least one fan sticking with the Orioles. A Baltimore disc jockey has pledged to stay on the air until the Birds win a game. His marathon started at 5:30 yesterday morning, and so far it looks like that DJ will get plenty of air time. I'm Jim Lampley, and that's sports this morning.
You probably always wonder why people talk about the 1988 Baltimore Orioles so much. Like, what's so cool about a team that went 54-107? Well, that's because this team has the infamous record of starting the year off 0-21.
You stupid!
Which to this day is still the longest losing streak to begin a season. And it always had me wondering though, has anyone come close to this record? And if so, how close? Because obviously it hasn't been broken or tied since, but there's got to be someone that for a minute there we thought might actually do it. And you just have to fast forward 9 years later to find a team that would come really not necessarily close, but close enough to where people started talking about it. As in 1997, the Chicago Cubs got off to a really bad start, and I mean a really, really bad start. How bad? Well, they started 0-14, which is the closest anybody has come to the 1988 Orioles record of losing streak to begin a season. These teams have a lot more in common than you would think, though, as they both have kind of like a big three in their lineups. You know, very good players, Hall of Famers, or some that should be Hall of Famers. Like the 88 Orioles had Eddie Murray, Fred Lynn, and Cal Ripken Jr. in the same lineup, while the 97 Cubs had Sammy Sosa, Ryan Sandberg, and Mark Grace in their lineup. So the lineup shouldn't have been a problem, even though they were, because, you know, with the 88 Orioles, everybody remembers Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken Jr. getting off to historically bad slumps for them. And with the Cubs, they were just kind of being carried by those three, that the rest of the lineup didn't really do much. And they also both lacked pitching. I mean, that was the weakness on both of these teams, and it really showed throughout the first couple of weeks of their seasons. Now the question is, which streak in itself was more grueling, more worse? Because, yeah, you know, the Orioles lost 21 straight and the Cubs lost 14 straight to begin the year. It's grueling either way, especially if you're a fan of those teams. These teams had to come close during these streaks, like really, really close in some games. And I kind of looked at it, and through the Orioles' first 21 games when they went winless, they led 25 times and played in 13 close games, which to me, close games means 3 runs or less. And they blew just about, I think, 10 leads during this time. So the Orioles had plenty of ample opportunities to win games, and they just couldn't do it, whether it was they forgot how to hit late in games, or maybe the pitching came in, bullpen or whatever, and just collapsed. For the Chicago Cubs, they led just 9 times, but yet played 9 close games, and this was kind of what haunted the Cubs through these first 14 games, was even though they were playing in a lot of close games, they would always get off to slow starts. They'd have final scores of 5-4, but they trailed 5-0 through the first 5 innings before even attempting to make a comeback. So this team didn't lead as much as the 88 Orioles, and I know they, you know, technically I'm looking at 7 less games for the 97 Cubs than the 88 Orioles, but the Orioles at least had more leads than losses, whereas the Cubs, they barely led because they got off to very, very slow starts and would have to play from behind a lot, whereas the Orioles actually had some games where they were going into the 6th, 7th, 8th inning and leading those games only to blow them in the end. Now, unlike the 88 Orioles, who lost 107 games, this Cub team avoided the 100 loss plateau as they went 68-94, which obviously still isn't good, but still very impressive, as their first win came on April 20th of 1997 on Game 2 of a doubleheader. So after going 0-14 just hours before, the Chicago Cubs fans finally got to see a win on the same day to make themselves feel better. But then the big thing these two teams have in common is the season afterwards, they came out and surprised a lot of people. In 1989, the Orioles had their Why Not season.
Why not? It's really happening. Now the Birds are on the wing. Come on, O's, we can win this thing. Why not?
In in a year where they were supposed to probably be worse than the 88 team, they somehow went 87-75, finishing just 2 games within the division of the Toronto Blue Jays. Not making the playoffs, but a 33-win improvement is still pretty stellar. And with the 1998 Chicago Cubs, they would have to play a 163rd game, but a 90-73 record was enough for them to get the wild card, where they would get swept in the division series by those 90s Braves. But hey, I don't think anybody was expecting the Cubs to get that far, considering the season they had before. So these two teams are more similar than you would think, even though one streak lasted 7 games longer than the other. It was just very interesting because everybody talks about that 88 Orioles team, but I had never heard anything about this 97 Cubs team beforehand starting off like that. You think you would, because it's like, oh, well, they have the second longest losing streak to begin a season after the 88 Orioles, their 0-21 start. But no, it just kind of gets swept under the rug because of how the 88 Orioles started and how that is the record, when the Cubs were basically on their way to doing the same thing. They just kind of won it a little bit earlier and finished with a better record, so nobody seems to kind of talk about it as much as they probably should, considering it was almost mirror to the Orioles with having the, Hall of Fame hitters and a bad pitching staff, and then coming back the next year and having a magical season. I just found that kind of odd that it was so close and so similar, and it just felt like a coincidence in whatever way. But hey, again, that's just what makes baseball fun. You always got to expect the unexpected, and sometimes teams come out and just, well, a team that has no expectations whatsoever might come out and be competitive and maybe even make a deep run in the playoffs, whereas teams that are expected to do something, even win a World Series, underachieve and don't do what they're supposed to do. So until then, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.
The big baseball story, the Baltimore Orioles finally did it.
21